And so we have the opportunity tonight to listen to a man that really needs no introduction. Last year, I read his biography, and when I did, I would have dreamed that I would have the privilege of introducing him. When he was actually just slightly younger than me, he became the chief of staff to the President of the United States. He then returned home to his home state and ran for the House of Representatives and served in that capacity from 1979 to 1989. He was then appointed the Secretary of Defense from 1989 to 93, where I gained my first personal memories of him briefing the world during the Gulf War. After that, he became the chairman and CEO of the Halliburton Company from 1995 to 2000, and during the presidential race in 2000, he was asked by then-candidate George W. Bush to find the most qualified man in the country to serve as a vice presidential running mate. And I believe that the president knew that there was really only one man, and he just needed to convince him a little bit to become what he became, the 46th Vice President of the United States of America from 2001 to 2009. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome to the stage tonight a hero of mine and a leader in our country, the Honorable Mr. Dick Cheney.
Mercy. Thank you. Thank you all very much. A welcome like that's almost enough to make a fellow want to run for office again. Almost. Don't overdo it. It's great to be back in Montana. I am a regular on the Bighorn. Spent some time last October down there catching big browns and chasing sharp-tailed grouse. And I can't help when I come up to Montana but think about how close I came to being a citizen of Montana. Because back in about 1954, my dad, who worked for the Soil Conservation Service in those days, got reorganized. We were living in Lincoln, Nebraska. And after he came home from the Navy in World War II, we went back to work for the Soil Conservation Service. But Eisenhower came in after the '52 election, reorganized the Ag Department, and Dad was given a choice between Casper, Wyoming, or Great Falls, Montana. He could have gone either place. And he picked Casper, Wyoming. And there are a couple folks there, but I was telling folks the other night, and my wife and I, Lynn, are getting ready to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary come August. And when we moved to Casper, I met Lynn and grew up together, went to high school together. And I explained to a group of people the other night that if Dad had picked Great Falls, Montana, I would had gone to Montana instead of Wyoming and never met Lynn, and she would have married somebody else. And she said, right, and then he would have been Vice President of the United States. But it is good to be back, and it's also great to have an opportunity to spend some time with the folks in the energy business and the energy industry. I really, when I made the decision to go to Halliburton after I left the Defense Department, I had decided, I'd thought about whether or not I wanted to run for national office myself and decided I did not, that I'd had a great 25 years in the public sector, and the idea of going to take over Halliburton was very appealing and very attractive. And so I went with great enthusiasm and became the chairman and CEO of Halliburton, and I loved it. It was a great company, but it was a great industry and a great business, and I was always proud of what we were able to do as an industry. And never more so than I am now when I think about what's happening out there, what we've done by way of developing the technology and risking the investments and working very, very hard to make us, in effect, self-sufficient in energy. And it always bugs me every time Barack Obama acts as though he had something to do with it. Because, of course, he didn't. The government didn't have much at all to do with it. But you may have noticed in the last few days I've been out speaking about national security problems and so forth, and been fairly critical of the administration and President Obama. Bill Clinton yesterday said that it was unseemly for me to be criticizing the president that way. And if there's somebody who knows something about unseemly, it's Bill Clinton. But I want to spend a few minutes tonight, and I want to be serious because I really am worried about the state of affairs. And of course, anybody in the energy business is aware of the turmoil in the Middle East right now. But we are in dangerous times looking forward. And the set of circumstances we're faced with now is a potentially very, very dangerous one for our country, for a lot of our friends and allies around the world. The Rand Corporation just came out the other day, a think tank. They do a lot of work for the Defense Department, which is how I got to know them when I was Secretary of Defense. But they came out with a study showing that in a 4-year period of time, from 2010 to 2013, there'd been a 58% increase in the number of Al-Qaeda type terrorist organizations around the world. And back in the days of 9/11, when we had to cope with that terrible attack on the United States, the focus was Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Now, if you look at the most recent RAND study, there's been roughly a doubling in the number of terrorists. That's obviously an estimate, but as I say, a 58% increase in the number of Al-Qaeda type terrorist organizations and terrorist groups. And they're not just concentrated now in Afghanistan. You can find them from West Africa, all across North Africa, down the east coast of Africa, Somalia and so forth, up through the Middle East and all the way around to Indonesia. And their goals and objectives are the same. They're not all Al-Qaeda, I want to be very precise, but they are Salafi jihadists. They're people with similar beliefs and attitudes. The greatest goal in life for many of them is to die for Allah and in the process kill as many non-believers as they can. And we all saw what they were able to do on 9/11 when 19 of them showed up here with airline tickets and box cutters. That's all they had, airline tickets and box cutters. Took down the World Trade Center, blew a big hole in the Pentagon, would have taken out the White House or the Capitol building if it hadn't been for the courageous passengers on United Flight 93. And killed 3,000 Americans. And now we're in a situation where the administration has chosen, in effect, as best I can tell, not to recognize the extent of the problem. We had the Benghazi incident last year, you may remember, a few weeks before the election, and we had 4 of our people killed, including the ambassador in Benghazi. And the initial report, in effect, turned out to be a cover-up. They blamed it all on a video, not on terrorists, not on a planned terrorist attack. And of course, that wasn't true. It was a false narrative. But I often have the feeling as I watch them operate now that they are still out there peddling a false narrative, that the president hasn't really come to grips with the scope of the problem. And now we're to the point where we are in Iraq as we meet tonight because there was no stay-behind agreement negotiated with the Iraqis. The military, our guys in the Pentagon, wanted to leave behind 20,000 U.S. troops. We've done this all over the world. We have 40 of these status of forces agreement, but leave them behind to do training and provide intelligence capability, air support, so that the Iraqis could continue to progress and be able ultimately to take care of themselves. We don't want to be there forever. We don't want a large group in combat, but by the time we left office at the end of '08, Iraq was in pretty good shape. The guys had done a hell of a job at obviously considerable cost. But now, because there was no follow-on agreement, because Barack Obama pulled everybody out on about 2011, We've now seen what has happened as a result of that decision to get everybody out, as well as the activities of Maliki, the Iraqi prime minister. He purged a lot of the Sunnis out of the armed forces, took a number of steps so that now we've got a group of Al-Qaeda. It used to be Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now it's Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria. But they now have taken over a large part of Iraq. Relatively small force, few thousand troops. But they are so brutal that even Al-Qaeda wants to hold them at arm's length. It's an evolution of the group. The thing that worries me about the proposition we have today is we're seeing a proliferation of that kind of organization, taking over more and more territory and country. We also have in the whole area of nuclear possibilities to be aware of what's going on out there. My great fear, and this goes back to before 9/11, and I actually did an interview in the spring of '01, about 5 months before 9/11, in which I was asked what the most serious threat facing America was, and I said it's the possibility of a terrorist attack by people armed with a weapon of mass destruction, chemicals, biological agent, or even a nuclear weapon. This was before 9/11. After 9/11, we discovered, among other things, that Al-Qaeda was trying to get their hands on a nuclear device in the aftermath of 9/11. Fortunately, they haven't, at least so far as we know. But we've seen during that period of time, there has been a significant proliferation of nuclear materials and nuclear capability in that part of the world. When we took down Saddam Hussein, he'd had a nuclear program back in '81 that the Israelis took out. He started his second one. We took it out in Desert Storm in '91. But we believed he was back in the business again, or soon would be. When we took down Saddam, we eliminated Iraq at that point as a potential source of nuclear technology. And Muammar Gaddafi watched us do that, and he stepped up in 5 days after we, after we dug Saddam out of his hole. Gaddafi surrendered his nuclear materials to us, his centrifuges, his uranium feedstock, and his weapons design. And that was done directly as a result that he did not want to have the same thing happen to him that had happened to Saddam. So got rid of Saddam, Gaddafi surrendered his nukes. The third thing we did was we took down the AQ Khan network. Now, Mr. Khan was a Pakistani scientist, a guy who'd been involved in building the Pakistani program. And the Paks today have somewhere between 50 and 100 nuclear weapons. And we put Khan out of business. He was placed under house arrest in Pakistan. Libya had been his best customer. So we dried up 3 major sources, if you will, at that point. But that by no means was the whole problem. And since then, if you watch what's happened in that part of the world, remember when Gaddafi was overthrown in the coup. You can imagine what that would have been like if he'd had nuclear materials. Today, of course, we've had the raging conflict in Syria for last 3 years. At one point, we discovered, this was about '07, that North Korea had built a nuclear reactor in eastern Syria for Bashar Assad. And it was taken out when the Israelis took it out in an airstrike in the fall of '07. We also discovered from AQ Khan, it's been in the newspapers, that the North Koreans had bribed Pakistan for sophisticated uranium enrichment technology. And we know that there are operating today in North Korea, because there have been American scientists who've seen it, some 2,000 centrifuges enriching uranium in North Korea. So if you start to look at all of those various ties and connections, especially involving North Korea and Pakistan, a couple weeks ago, the Taliban, they're indigenous to Pakistan, launched a major attack on the Karachi airport, killed 34 people. But you've got the Taliban, that, by the way, is the group that were the 5 terrorists that were released from Guantanamo, were leaders of that organization. Of course, President Obama sent them back now. They're in Qatar for a period of time, but eventually they'll end back on the battlefield against us. But the situation in Pakistan is worrisome because they've already sold materials once, if you believe Khan, to the North Koreans. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, and I think they most assuredly will, negotiations are underway, but I think they're running the administration around by the nose. Then there'll be other governments in the Middle East who want nuclear weapons. They won't feel safe if Iran's got them and they don't. And we're going to have a number of states with nuclear weapons. We're going to have potential for black market operations like we had before with Khan. And we're going to have an ever-expanding number of terrorist organizations who'd like nothing better than to get their hands on something deadlier than airline tickets and box cutters the next time they want to launch a mass casualty attack against the United States. It's very, very serious stuff. And in the midst of all of this, what's the administration's position been? Well, they've moved as rapidly as they could to reduce our presence in the Middle East. Pulled out of Iraq. The only military in Iraq left today in the U.S. are basically in the embassy there in the attaché office. There's some contractor personnel. He's announced he's going to get out of Afghanistan by 2016 and bring home everybody from there. Well, that's not a very good idea. Well, partly because when it was time to get bin Laden, where did we launch from? We launched from Afghanistan. That's where the SEALs took off from to go capture and kill bin Laden. How do we keep track of what's going on in the Pakistani nuclear program? From Afghanistan, they've got a long common border right next to each other. But Obama is moving as rapidly as he can to reduce our footprint in the Middle East and to reduce our presence. And I know, we've been involved there for a long time. Everybody says, gee, those wars have gone on forever. Well, it hasn't been forever, but you don't have, when they fight in the kind of battle that we may have to fight, and that we have before, you've got to go till you win. And it's a whole different proposition when you're dealing with an organization like Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda wannabes, and especially if they are able to arm themselves with something deadlier than they've ever had before. So from the standpoint of what the United States needs to be doing, we need to reverse course on the military. We're to the point now where he's cutting the budget so deeply, the United States Army is going to have fewer soldiers in it than we had before Pearl Harbor. We've got 40 brigades in the United States Army, 4 of them are combat ready. Only 4 out of the 40 combat ready today, ready to pack up and take off and go accomplish a mission for us. Dramatic cuts all across the board in terms of the capabilities. We used to plan, when I was secretary, we had basically a 2-war strategy. We had to maintain sufficient forces to be able to fight 2 wars at once. He switched that. Now we're going to have a 1-war strategy. And that's all being done as a rationale to justify further deep cuts in the defense budget so he can allocate that money to food stamps or whatever else he wants to spend it on. So I have been very critical of the, somebody likes food stamps. I have been very critical of the administration, but I think it's extraordinarily important that in the days and months ahead, we're going to have an election this fall. I'm not a candidate. I'm not running for anything, but I do plan to be heard. Been there, done that. It's very important as a nation, though, that we reclaim that mantle that we've had since World War II, that the United States of America is a basic force for good around the world. The United States military is at the heart of that success, and first-class military, and the will to use it on occasion when it's necessary, and that the world is a safer place because of the United States of America, one of their strong national power. So you will hear more from me. That's one of the reasons I'm out this particular week. Last week, my daughter Liz and I announced we created a new organization. It's called a 501c4. It's basically a group, a grassroots organization that we will use to raise money and to keep pushing front and center those issues that I've talked about here tonight, to make certain that the next election turns on who can best defend the United States of America. So I want to thank all of you, what you do for all of us. I know how valuable the industry is to our national security. I was proud to be a member of the industry. I thought I was going to be very active, and that was going to be my career. And then George W. asked me to find somebody to be his running mate, and it turned out I was a lousy headhunter. I'll never forget the night I went home to my wife. We were living in Dallas then. We'd been there 5 years. I had real work, private sector, good job. And I went home, and President had just reasoned with me, and then Governor. And I said, honey, sell the house. I quit my job. We're going back into politics. We nearly didn't make 50 years. But I have enormous respect for what you all do. You're a very vital and important part of our economy. And I've been proud over the years to work with as part of and also in the public sector to do what I can to help achieve what we're able to achieve given the tremendous resources we have as a nation and the ingenuity and entrepreneur spirit that's very much a part of our energy industry. So thank you very much for what you do for all of us.